Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are reconvening in open session. Just a brief report out. Council met in closed session earlier this afternoon. Council agreed to send to legislative session the agreement of sale of parking lots 1 and 11 in downtown Salisbury, and that will be scheduled for next Monday. The next item on the agenda is the rent stabilization program. Mayor Ireton, I will hand it over to you.
He's right there.
Oh, I didn't see it. Gotcha. First off, Mr. Council President, I do want to thank you for how quickly you put this on the agenda after it was released. It is deeply appreciated. There's some misunderstanding in the local media about powers that I have, which is, and I do appreciate how quickly you were able to get that on there. Just as an idea of where we're going, I don't know whether or not we'll need all the time that you have allotted. What we'll quickly do is just outline a few reasons why we have gotten to the point where we thought this was an issue that should be discussed in the city, and then be able to walk you through what you all have had since, I guess, last Wednesday, some of the statistics, some of the charts that have been used to come up with. And then we're contacted by the Chamber of Commerce today with their letter as well. But first, let me do this and thank each and every one of you, because over the last couple of years we have seen receivership in the city passed, and we are starting to have a wee bit slowly, but starting to have success in that particular vein. The receivership program that we modeled after Baltimore City. The foreclosed and vacant property registries that you all have passed have been very helpful to Ms. Phillips and her department and my office. The CDI initiative, which is allowing us to go and take properties that have been sitting for extended lengths of time with nothing happening to them, beginning to take them down. We are still, in terms of the big things that are out there, we're still in the Court of Appeals about non-conforming uses and those that were cut up without permission. The Poplar Hill is still in that particular court, and from what I understand from Mr. Tillman, it could be tomorrow, it could be a year, it could be 2 years. The Court of Appeals will do what it is they want to do on their own time frame. Just as an aside, very quickly, I've been asked several times over the last couple of weeks, why now? So I thought maybe it was a very good idea to let you know why it is now. One was a comment that Mr. Heath made during the amortization discussion that we discussed, but the council chose not to forward. Mr. Heath said, "I'm really looking, Mr. Mayor, for Plan B." And though I believe that this is Plan X, Y, and Z after 30 years in our city, I took that to heart and did what Mr. Heath asked me to do. I went and tried to find another way to begin to address some of the situations that we find ourselves in our most at-risk neighborhoods. The other was sitting with Ernie Colburn from the Chamber, as he said that the Chamber uses a three-pronged strategy for whether or not they're going to support something. Is it good for their members? Is it good for the Chamber? And is it good for businesses? And as I looked at it, I thought, is it good for our neighborhoods? Is it good for the people who live there? Is it good for Salisbury? I thought I hit on all three the way the Chamber had. The third was oddly enough, a visit from the Pope, which I guess John Boehner really steals that thunder. But what we do for the least among us has to be of primary consideration, whether or not in our personal lives or in the government. And when we started to look at rent stabilization and what it might mean for the people's pocketbooks of people who pay rent in our city, it was obvious that regardless of what they're going to use their money for, people will have more money. The other thing really for me is twofold. I do appreciate the support of the NAACP on this initiative, and the support of Delegate Cherie Sample Hughes, who represents parts of Salisbury as well in the endeavor. In the end, what we have is that receivership, CDI, Community Development Initiative, and foreclosed and vacant property registries address the issue with the property after the property has already fallen into a state where it has become a drag both on the neighboring properties and on the city. So what we tried to look for is something that would help us at the front end instead of at the back end. So as Mr. Williams is going to go through the rent stabilization thing, is that on? I don't see the little bird. Anyone? Bueller? You want me to try and reach it? And while Kim's doing that, let me just go over a couple of the brief statistics. 2,700 households in Salisbury are paying over 50% of their income for rental costs. In a community where the median household income is $37,000 and renter median income is less than $29,000, we also know that rent is now over $1,000 a month through what we've seen from the Census Bureau over the last couple weeks. From 2000 to 2008, rents in Salisbury and income in Salisbury did rise, overtaking the national average. But then at the crash of 2008, we saw that income started to slide downward, whereas rent in Salisbury continued to go upward. In fact, in real terms, median household income in Salisbury fell by about $8,500 at the crash. Let's see. Rent stabilization looks to reduce rents across the board by about 22%. We think that that will generate about $8 million into the economy, because the only houses that are going to be targeted for rent stabilization are single-family homes that have been converted into rental properties. It will not be the large complexes. It's just single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes, and I think we have a couple quadruplexes out there. I'm not exactly sure I'm using that quadruplex word correctly. That might be something wrong with the back of your leg. All rental units, we believe it'll be about $8 million. In our letter from the Chamber of Commerce, what we're hearing is that the administration modeled their legislation after College Park. Well, College Park actually didn't implement their legislation that we have put before you. That legislation was changed when special interest groups came in and changed it to make it so that only single-family homes that turned into rentals after the legislation was passed were subject to rent stabilization. So yes, their experiment didn't work because they actually didn't do the experiment that they said they were going to do. They changed it at the last minute. The other thing that we see here is that the Chamber believes that there might be a net effect of providing fewer rental units and decreasing the size of the rental market. Well, in a city that it's already 66% rental, the idea of that opportunity for home ownership and houses going from rental back to home ownership, I don't necessarily believe could be a bad thing. We all do agree, though, and I think the Chamber and Mr. Colburn, actually it was Chris, I'm sorry, Chris, Mr. Eccleston did nail it on the head, is that all of us are looking for a desire to ensure affordable housing for low-income families. And we cite River's Edge down the street as an example. And that is a good example, and that's a right example, and all of us did the right thing by getting that project to go forward. But what happens is that people who live in existing single-family homes come out of those rentals, and then we have rent going up again. So it is the single-family home, the bread and butter of our city, where people are raising children, getting up and going to work, that seem to be where all of this converges into making a situation very difficult. We've heard calls for we should allow 4 people to be back inside of a house. Well, that effectively happened. Of the 273 properties that were going to be made to unrelated people, about 80% of them got 3 unrelated or 4 unrelated people back into them anyway. So that's sort of a moot argument. So we believe that the statistics say that rent is going this way, income is going that way, and we believe that through all of the things that you've had to do with abandoned properties, I think that there are 300 abandoned, boarded up, the bank is gone, all of those things that cause a house to sit there in a neighborhood and make life difficult for everyone who lives there. All of those things are continuing to happen. So instead of going to the back end of the property, like we have done with receivership, CDI, and foreclosed and vacant properties, we went to the front end of the property to discuss whether or not, compared to the rest of this nation, the people who live in Salisbury are paying fair rent. So I will turn this over to Mr. Williams, who will walk you through a very quick PowerPoint. And it's, well, It's quick-ish. So I will go ahead and do that. And then if there are any questions from council, you all have had this for a couple of days and over the weekend. If there are questions that we can take back so that we can get answers for you, we'd be happy to do that. No one is expecting rent stabilization to pass this evening, least of all me, because I knew that there would be questions all the way around. I will say that the crowd generated said that we've gotten somebody's attention, and that's a good thing for Salisbury, whether they are for it or against it. Mr. Williams? You want to go? You going to go here? I know.
Thank you all very much. Pleasure to be here tonight. So rent stabilization. This is going to be about I'm going to try to do this in about 10 to 15 minutes presentation. For council, any type of numerical or technical questions that you have, I'd be more than happy to answer to. Anything political or philosophical, I'm going to have to turn over to the mayor. But here we go. So I'm going to start with home ownership. Home ownership currently stands at about 34% in Salisbury. Most metro areas, it's around 50%. Nationally, which includes rural areas, it's about 64%. Salisbury is the second lowest rate of home ownership in Maryland. And out of 250 principal cities of metropolitan statistical areas, which those are non-suburbs that form their own economic unit according to the Census Bureau, Salisbury ranks 7th for lowest home ownership out of them. So with together, we can safely say that Salisbury is one of the lowest home ownership rate municipalities in the country. If you look at this on the graph, you see Salisbury is right here. It's at 66%, and this is renting, not how it's inverted, not home ownership. Nationally, it's about 34%, and across the board in metro areas, you're looking at about 46% is the median renter occupied. So Salisbury really is, I mean, bar none, one of the highest concentration of rental units in the area. So this is why we're focusing on rents and rent stabilization, because in a traditional housing market, overwhelmingly you're looking at home ownership and sales and other such data that goes into home ownership. But in a market where it's overwhelmingly renting, you have to kind of reverse how you analyze it. So if you look at median gross rent, which is rent and utilities, traditionally you use this term because some contracts include some utilities, some contracts don't. As of 2013, which is the latest data we have, median gross rent stood at about $994. Contract rent asked, median was about $800. And if you look at where our gross rent is, it's as high or higher than Hilton Head, South Carolina, where median value of homes are about $400,000. Chicago, Illinois, Cary, North Carolina, it's part of the Research Triangle, median household incomes between $50,000 and $60,000. Dallas, Texas, Tampa, Florida, I mean, the list goes on. Recently, as of September 17th, the Census Bureau released 2014 numbers for Wycomico. Across the county, gross rents rose an additional $100. So right now, we have about $1,076 as the median gross rent. Contract rent also rose by approximately $50 to $810. Rents in Salisbury have always been higher than the rest of the county. So if you project this out, you're looking at Salisbury median gross rent of over $1,100 and median contract rent over $850. Half of all rental units in Wycomico County are in Salisbury, and a third of all the population is in Salisbury. So again, if we look at this across the 250 cities, we see Salisbury, 994, that's ranked 19th. Unlike previously, where the national average of home ownership was higher than the rest of the metropolitan areas, national median gross rent was actually higher. So realistically, Salisbury as a metro area should be lower than the national average, just by that fact alone. And this is where we get into why rent stabilization. These are the economic characteristics of our area. Our median household income is about half of Maryland's. Our poverty rate is 3 times Maryland's. Among African Americans, it's also nearly 3 times as high. Median value of homeowner occupied homes is about half that of Maryland's. Again, housing tenure, cost burden, which we'll get into, are all the economic characteristics of our area. It by no means support an economic argument for rents being as high as they are. If you look at incomes, this is again the 250 cities. Salisbury's income, as you can see, is near the low end. We're in the last third percentile or tritile, whatever it would be. National median income, as I said, is 52. Across Maryland, it's right around here at 72. So, you know, we have very low median household income. As Mayor Ireton said, renter household income is even lower. It's a little under 30,000. So if you take our economic characteristics, and this is sorted by median income, Salisbury ranks 163rd out of 250. And if you look at, for municipalities that are similar to us, rents are on average between $150 and $200 less in terms of contract rent, and between 100 and 150 and 200 less gross rent, 150 less contract rent. So if you look at one of the closest for us is Gainesville, Georgia, renter occupancy is about the same, median house value is almost exactly the same, median income is only about $1,000 more, population is almost exactly the same, but median gross rent is over $200 less, median contract rent's over $150 less. Similarly, if you look at Florence, Alabama, they have a higher home ownership rate, so this is 43% renter. Equivalent, actually lower house value, comparable population, and again, 556, 390. The only place that kind of is a statistical anomaly, like Salisbury, is New Haven, Connecticut, which is known for its economic disparity, being the home of Yale, but also having an incredibly high poverty rate. So traditional economics simply do not explain why this is what it is. The average value of homes is lower, median household income is lower, renter income is lower, average wage per job across the county is significantly lower. Vacancy rate is actually higher or about the same, both in terms of renter and housing occupancy, and monthly ownership costs are lower. While in 2000 rents were lower than the national average, by proportion they were unfairly high. But from 2000 to 2008, rents rose dramatically. Average home prices in Salisbury doubled from 2000 to 2008, which of course led to an increase in maintenance costs. And on top of that, energy costs also rose. You know, we saw a boom in oil, and that had an effect everywhere else. Since the real estate crash of 2008, unlike the rest of the nation and most metro areas, rents didn't drop. Most metro areas saw a stabilization of their rents, or in some places a drop in their rents. And when you adjust our income for inflation, it dropped, as the mayor said, $8,500 from 2008 to 2013. And then here are some more comparative areas. You see Salisbury, $798 median contract rent, only about $200 less than New York, which is one of the highest rents in the country. Typically, it's Mid and Southern California have the highest rents in the country, then New York, then the DC metro area. So here, very good. Salisbury has about a 1-year lag in terms of economic conditions in the rest of the nation affecting us. So if you see here, the light green, that's median household income. The dark green is gross rent. This right here, 2009 is when it started to change, and 2010 is when it really hit. So what you see is that rents are either stabilized or rising. This is nominal, not adjusted, or sorry, this is real, adjusted for inflation. In nominal terms, rents rose, of course, because of inflation. But in real terms, they either stabilized or rose. So what does this lead to? This leads to high cost burden, which both the Harvard Institute for Housing Studies and the Department of Housing and Urban Development determined to be 30% of your income, approximately a third of your income. If that's going towards housing costs, which is rental and utilities, you're considered cost burden. Currently, cost burden stands at 59% in Salisbury. Severe cost burden paying over 50%, which about 10 years ago nationally was like 12% and people were freaking out. Here it's 36%. These numbers rose across Wicomico County because even though 2013 to 2014 household income rose throughout Wicomico County, which is good, if you look at the renter income actually only rose by about $900. So a lot of that change in household income was the $8,000 increase in owner income, which is why you have an increase in cost burden across Wicomico County from 2013 to 2014. So we're still feeling the effects of the crash, even though incomes are starting to rise. It's a disproportionate rise. Generally speaking, the owner households are receiving the rise, while the renter incomes are not doing so. If you adjust this for inflation, I mean, this is about 1% over inflation. Inflation is typically 2 to 3%. So this is what severe cost burden has become. If you see in 2000, we were right around 22%. At the time of the crash, we had come up to 26%, and now we're at 36%. So you see, since the crash, just severe cost burden has skyrocketed. If you actually look at the research of what determines rents, most of it doesn't have to do with supply and demand. If you look at our vacancy rate, this is just rental vacancy rate. You'll see that in 2007, rental vacancy stood at 5.5%. By 2013, it had only increased by about 1%, but contract rent had risen from $630 to about $800. One such urban economist said, despite conventional supply-demand economic theory, rental vacancy rates rarely matter in lowering rental prices in the rental market. Median house value and median household income across the country are the dominant factors that determine rents from an economic standpoint. And that leads to the idea that additional housing, even if we were to expand dramatically, is not going to have any lowering effect, or any stabilizing effect, more or less lowering effect. So why did rents rise after 2008? There's about 2 different economic theories that we can apply to our local area. First is high default rates. When you have rents stabilizing or increasing and incomes dropping precipitously, you will have an increase in the default rate. Now, of course, all of you landlords will be able to tell me if that's accurate or not, because I don't have the data to support that for our individual area. But Ambrose and Diop in the Journal of Urban Economics found that out of 75 metropolitan statistical areas, they concluded that an increase in residential risk, measured by default rate, corresponds to an increase in average rents. Obviously, to cover for that loss from the default, generally speaking, you have to raise rents to cover the loss as a whole. This is not on an individual landlord basis. This is in terms of an aggregate economic standpoint. Of course, this is just a theory. We don't have it otherwise. The other idea is the local financing mechanism. Right now, if you look at the financing that occurred before 2008 for many rental properties, you'll see that this isn't across the board. This is some landlords and some banks. If you look right here on the bottom right-hand corner, if you take the assessed value of the properties that are being used as collateral, and you subtract out from the loans, you have a difference in this loan, and this is one of the more egregious ones, of about $1 million. Now, generally, the assessment of a property is slightly depreciated than the actual market value, but nevertheless, if you use pricing data and you adjust that for inflation, it still does allow for about a comparable amount. So 2005, when these 2 loans were taken out, $2.2 million and $500,000, the values of the properties were only worth about $1.7 million. But the loans in total were about for $2.7 million. So the only way that you can realistically back a mortgage is by assigning the lease and rents. So if you look at a lot of the indemnity deed of trust, and this is a tool that's fairly unique to Maryland, this allows you to avoid recordation taxes. It means that a lot of your mortgage is backed by a speculative investment. Luckily, after the crash, a lot of community banks have started to, or have stopped doing that. But nevertheless, the crash itself, values of houses in Salisbury peaked around 2009. If you see this individual, they did refinance for a lower mortgage, a $2 million mortgage instead of $2.7 million. But if you see, as a result of the crash, because this mortgage was taken out in 2009 when prices were at their highest, there's still a discrepancy of about $800,000. So in order to pay back these mortgages, you need to find a way to make up that money. Or else, if you don't have a fixed mortgage, your interest rates would spike. Or otherwise, eventually you have to pay back the mortgage one way or another. So if your mortgage is not backed by equitable assets, it's actually backed by a speculative concept. But this isn't the only thing that affects rents. We also have frequent refinancing. This, again, is not all landlords, but many major landlords have done this, where in terms of a traditional financing model, you take out a 30-year mortgage, you pay back both the principal and the interest over the course of that 30-year mortgage. Yet here, that same property was purchased in 1986 for about $1 million. Adjusted for inflation, that is about $2 million, so it has retained the same value throughout that period. Mortgage was taken out for $750,000. It was refinanced in 1999. 30 of these 36 properties were used in conjunction with 52 others to take out a $2.8 million mortgage. The other 6 were used to take out a $255 mortgage. This money was used to pay off the $750,000 original mortgage along with other mortgages. In 2002, the 30 properties were released for an undisclosed amount of money, obviously some proportion of the 2.8. And in 2005, all 36 were again mortgaged up for that $2.2 million. So what you're seeing here is a landlord taking out a mortgage, paying off the interest or a portion of the principal, and over a certain period of time, they then they remortgage the property, either with the same bank or a different bank, thereby refinancing it. And here we are in 2012, even though over the course of a 30-year mortgage, this initial sum should be paid off. 2009, the 2.7 was paid off, but there still is $2 million outstanding. So that's why right here, this sum is not $2 million, as much as that sounds like, is not a lot for a landlord over the course of 30 years. But when over the course of 30 years, the principal has not been paid down and you only have $2 million, that's going to cause an inflationary effect. College rentals. It's very important to understand in our local economy, college rentals don't have an outsized effect on median contract rent. Using census data, you can estimate that there are approximately 650 college student rental units in Salisbury corporate limits. Out of the 7,300 rental units in Salisbury, even when they're taken out, they don't have a statistical effect upon median contract rent. Median contract rent only drops about 4.6% to $761, which is still above the national average of about $740. And it's above the affordability level for Salisbury of $623. It's what the market can handle. This is something I've heard time and again, and it's a phrase that's used to kind of dismiss this concept of rent stabilization and everything else. It's what the market can handle. It's not really appropriate in a rental market. Some urban economists have found that when you have a quasi-monopolistic rental market, their rents are artificially raised. Because what happens is rents are not, as I said earlier, tied directly to supply and demand, but they're tied to what the going rate is among landlords. There is no competition because in Salisbury, we aren't an inner city where someone can move out to the suburbs. We lack public transportation, we lack jobs, everything is in relatively the core of our city. So on top of that, if you look at the owners of rental properties throughout the Tri-County area, many of those people are the same group of individuals. So it creates a quasi-monopoly is the term that's used. This is particularly true within the single-family rental market. Single-family rental financing is a bit more local than multifamily rental financing. So if you take it out to a multifamily unit standpoint, it's less monopolistic. But from the market that we're looking at specifically, it's more so. Additionally, the market is not an ephemeral entity or idea. The market's backed by real people who are increasingly paying more and more of their income. We see cost burden is rising, poverty is rising, overcrowding is rising, and absent affordable housing alternatives, there is nowhere else to go. People must pay what's out there. So what does it look like? It ties rents to the value of the property between 0.6% and 1% of the assessed value. As we've said repeatedly, it only applies to single-family units, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. Doesn't apply to apartment buildings. As was mentioned, it was passed by College Park in 2005. It was amended several times until eventually it was repealed at the behest of the local rental industry. A rent stabilization is created that sets the rents and hears appeals from both tenants and landlords. A number of exemptions are allowed. It allows for adjustments in inflation, it allows for capital improvement adjustments, tax and interest rate increases, unforeseen economic hardship, etc. Now, it's important to understand there is a difference between rent stabilization and rent control. Most economists, rightly so, lash out at rent control, which is a lot of the 1940s, 1950 rental freezes. When you freeze rents at a certain level and allow for no adjustment, it's obviously going to lead to disinvestment because there's no possible way you can get a return on investment. Second generation or moderate rent stabilization is stabilizing the rent by limiting the amount of increase. And this Econ Journal Watch, it's actually published by a fairly conservative think tank, and it cited an economist who said second generation rent controls are so different that they should be judged largely independent of the experience of first generation. The case against second generation rent controls is so weak that economists should at least soften their opposition to them. So there's two main arguments against rent stabilization. One is construction. Largely, the argument against rent stabilization is in terms of multifamily construction. That in and of itself doesn't apply here because this doesn't apply to multifamily construction. Traditionally, when one builds a single-family unit, they aren't building to rent it. There are exceptions, like we're seeing in terms of Pearl development and using low-income housing tax credits, but generally speaking, the national rental industry wants to finance multifamily construction. But nevertheless, neither moderate nor strong rent controls pose a serious enough economic threat for most builders to move to new markets. That's based on studies mainly of New Jersey, but also areas across the country. This is from Sage Policy Group and Dr. Basu. This was commissioned by College Park. Relevant literature related to the impact of rent stabilization on the level of new construction is mixed and therefore unclear. And the second one is maintenance. Again, an argument is made that maintenance will deteriorate over the course of the rent stabilization program. Again, this has been determined to be mixed at best, flawed at worst. Again, this is from the SAGE report. They found no consistent relationship between controlled and uncontrolled markets with respect to the quality of housing maintenance. And again, while traditional literature tends to argue that restrictive rent controls appear to have a negative impact on the quality and quantity, it's not necessarily the case. And this is Journal of Urban Affairs. In fact, the latest forms of moderate rent control have been too moderate. They found that many of these second generation rent controls have a effect on rents. They prevent price gouging, but they don't have the effect of considerably lowering rents across the board. Studies of New Jersey have found that the rent stabilization, although it did have a larger effect after the crash, because they did a study pre-crash and post-crash, it still did not have as much of an effect as desired. The College Park legislation has many of these, including full consumer price index adjustments, hardship exemptions, adjustments for capital improvements, appointed rent stabilization boards, and adjustment for tax increases. All of those allow for a more appreciable increase in rents. And something I also want to say, all ordinances now legally must have a fair return on investment provision. So if you are a small landlord that's only renting one house or two houses and your mortgage is higher than it would be under the rent stabilization, legally we cannot force you to lower it to certain extents. It's up to the rent stabilization board to determine and up to council to determine how much you're able to profit off of that. But if you are a small-time landlord, there are some protections involved. I'm nearly done, don't worry. This is 9 months of research, people. So actually, when you look at the real increase in rents, on average, 1/3 to 1/2 of landlords' costs were found to be unaffected by inflation. From Boston area, 71 to 73 found a 7% increase in total operating costs, including mortgage, but a 13% increase in inflation. And Los Angeles, 77 to 83, 36% rise in maintenance and operating, but a 64% increase in CPI. So actually allowing for a full CPI adjustment is actually allowing for an adjustment over the net operating costs. And of course, in Salisbury, we've seen year after year a increase in rents that are way, way above consumer pricing index. So what makes this different? What allows this to be effective? The biggest thing is there's no vacancy, decontrol, recontrol provisions. What those are, that says once a unit becomes vacant, it's no longer affected by the ordinance. We do not have this in the ordinance because that, more than anything, destroys a rent stabilization program within the moderate rent within moderate rent stabilization programs. They found that in Berkeley, as a result of vacancy decontrol rents, in 80% of Berkeley's rent stabilized units had an increase to market rate at least once. As a result, the total annual rents were approximately $100 million higher than they would have been if rents had simply increased at the same rate as the overall Bay Area Consumer Price Index. And as we've seen, the maintenance and operating costs of landlords actually increase at a slower rate than total CPI. So the effect of this is fairly clear. The last thing is that College Park's ordinance is a first of its kind in that it ties rent stabilization to the assessable base. So what this will effectively do is we will, hopefully, this will lower rents to appreciable levels. If you look at the assessed values of most rental properties in Salisbury, they're typically between about $20,000 and $50,000. So when you're charging a large amount of money, and by large I mean $500, on a property that's assessed at $20, $30, $40, $50, $60, it's going to allow for a larger return on investment than is typically done across the rest of the nation. And this is all phased in. So this is just a brief sample, I'm sorry it's so small, of different rental properties in Salisbury. You'll see in the Princeton Homes neighborhood, properties are assessed at between $33,000 and $34,000. And you can use pricing data to gauge about how much they are worth. Now, we can say that some of these properties are underassessed. And of course, the city's standpoint is, well, if it's underassessed, we'd like your taxes, please. But nevertheless, many of these are actually of equitable price. Here you have, where was it? Oh yeah, 434 Pennsylvania Avenue. It's assessed at $73,000, and it's about $84,000. So there's only about a $10,000 difference. Here, this one was bought for $3,000 in 1986. I mean, obviously that's a deflated price. And then another good one is 300 Pryor Avenue, which commands a rent of $1,200 a month. It's assessed for about $35,000, and adjusting for inflation from purchase price, it's about $36,000. But the most egregious are those in the Church Street Doverdale area and the west side. Right here, 523 Tangier. This is currently assessed for $31,000, and that is both the structure and the land. The land is worth about $16,000. The structure is worth $15,000. And this right here is actually a duplex, so it comprises both 521 and 523 Tangier. It was originally meant to be a single family. It was built in the 50s, I believe. Eventually it was converted to a duplex, and now it commands a rent of $475 per unit. So you have about a $950 a month is the asking price and the received price for these units when it was bought for only $20,000 in 1984. So it should be paid off.
Let's stop there for just a second, because what's important about this slide is how quickly, if your mortgage was that much, how quickly that house gets paid off, that mortgage at rates that are that high. I have a 30-year mortgage on my house. Some of these numbers could have this house paid off in 3.5 years. So that's where the disparity is that the rest of us have to live in the 30-year mortgage and go to the local bank. These numbers say that this house could be paid off within 3.5 to 4 years.
And that's really, this is the last slide, don't worry. And that is really what we're getting at this ordinance, which is price gouging. Price gouging is something that you can clearly see occurs based on the quality and the value of homes. And that's really what we're getting at. So does council have any technical questions or numerical questions before I turn it over to the mayor?
Shani, Jack, Tim?
I just had one, I think I
Mhm.
called. What's gross rent and contract rent?
Sorry, gross rent is a combination of both utilities and contract rent. So.
Contract rent is what's in your lease, correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's typically used because some leases will include utilities, some leases don't. Some leases include some utilities, some leases don't. And I should also point out that Salisbury also has one of the highest utility costs among the 250 cities, it ranks about 6th, which speaks to the high concentration that we have of pre-1940 housing and the low quality of housing that we have.
And the next question I have
Mhm.
is, there is a pro, I guess this is the pro.
Yeah, of course.
Other cities that had this rent stabilization,
Mhm.
and what happened to the cities? Have you looked that up?
Yeah,
Have you compared that?
yes.
Have that information?
Yeah, it's included in the report that I gave you at the very end. I understand it's a long report, I apologize. Generally speaking, there has been, with the exception of the 1940, 1950 price freezes, there really has not been a statistical significance in terms of quality of housing, construction of housing, or tax base. It's really across the board, not really had a lot of negative effects. Of course, there's plenty of economists that will argue otherwise, but there is.
I understand that, and I'm going to be very careful what I say here.
Of course.
Because I look at most of these homes that you have sampled or in my
Mhm.
district. I'm going to be very careful what I say.
Mhm.
And I read some research too before reading this book that you gave us. That in the 40s, New York City had rent control or rent stabilization, whatever you want to call it, after the war.
Mhm.
And if you look, and they said what happened to South Bronx and Queens, and I think economists has all kinds of different opinions. So I think that when someone's presented, I would like to see, before I even make a good comment,
Right.
the weigh it.
Well,
Look at other communities, because I hear what you're saying about people not making the money, but I have a homeowner sister that both her and her husband work 2 jobs to be a homeowner. So I do know people are still working what they're paying. They have to work 2 jobs to pay the cost of living. And one of the concerns I have, and especially in my spill for being reelected, is good paying jobs and make sure that people in our community are skilled workers to get
Right.
good paying jobs. And I think that economically is part of the problem. Is living wage is a very true concern. I believe in this community, as you already said, DP&L is the 5th largest utility that we have in the United States, because I work with the fuel assistance program, and everybody don't get fuel assistance. And I was concerned about senior citizens when I was talking to the mayor about that, who had worked all their life, but these folks have also worked 2 jobs to be a homeowner and choose not to be a homeowner anymore. Then you also have to look at people who've lost their homes and it became into foreclosure. Then you have to look at, it's a whole lot of stuff that's going on economic wise. But when you just look at my district, what happens in the other districts? Where I don't see other districts really on here except.
Well, Camden's here and Princeton Homes.
I see Princeton Homes, let's see, Pennsylvania Avenue, let's see, Tanger Street, and let's see.
Actually, Ms. Shields, we sort of made sure that each of the 5 districts, each of the 5 election districts are represented.
You were showing that people's mortgages, I think most of all of them were in District 1.
Yes, yeah, that specific.
Am I correct?
That specific set was within the Princeton Homes neighborhood. And I think I would like to answer.
And I just want to say, if you
Yeah,
want to
unless
talk
you
about
get
the
a
pros,
question.
I mean, the good part of stabilization, we should also
Unless
have
you
a
get a
picture of the
question.
cons. What's the disadvantage of doing this? Here's the advantage, and what's the disadvantage? And
Okay.
that's what I like to see.
Well,
Before I say
We're
anything
taking,
else.
what I'm going to do, Mr. Council President, is take notes. Shane's looking for both sides of the equation, both sides of the scale.
Yep. I think if the administration can take back from this conversation any notes that we received from public
That's
comment
what we're
or
doing.
from council, that would be.
I'm done.
Okay.
Any other questions at this time?
Submit the answers in written form.
I was going to say, what we didn't go over is what the rent stabilization board looks like. Theo, can you run through that and make sure that
Sure.
it's clear that each of the districts in the city have to be represented on the board? There is room for renters and there's a room for renter and a landlord, and then quickly go over what they can ask for the exceptions.
Right, sorry for that oversight. The Rent Stabilization Board is made up of 7 members. As it's written in the ordinance, there has to be at least 1 tenant, at least 1 landlord. The housing official will also serve on the board. The other five members, including the landlords and tenants, must all be from each of one of the 5 districts. They must all live within the city of Salisbury. Typically, it comes down to be with 2 landlords, 2 tenants, and usually about 2 homeowners is the makeup nationally of these kind of boards. And in terms of allowances, as I said, it allows for inflation. Capital improvements, that's a big thing. We want to ensure that between assessed years, capital improvements are given a return on their investment. Hardship exemptions, unforeseeable economic hardship exemptions are allowed. I think what else? Of course, fair rate of return, increase in taxes or increase in interest rates across the board, increase in maintenance costs across the board, anything along those lines that are considered uncontrollable or are controllable in a positive way, such as capital improvements, do receive an exemption. And lease to own and rent to own contracts allow for exemptions. I think that's it.
Okay. Are there other questions from council at this time? Mayor Ireton, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I
before
just
open
I
for-
appreciate the opportunity to discuss it. Like I said before, nobody's expecting this to pass this evening. It's part of a conversation that we need to have with one another, especially the 6 of us, when we keep coming back with the same problems that seem to be happening over and over and over again. I do like in this particular way that we've written it, that if improvements are made in the property and the even before it's reassessed and goes back up, you can come back before the board and say, I made these improvements. That's really what I think the homeowner occupied houses are looking for, is a way to make sure that the rising tide, that everybody's assessments and their values are going up. And that I think is one of the most important parts of the board, is that it allows people to come back and say, I've made substantial improvements in this house, improvements that are even more expensive, say in the historic district. We know that situation exists as well. That you can come back to the board and say, I think the rent needs to go up, and you don't have to wait for the 3-year assessable rate to go. Timeline to go around.
All righty.
You have
Thank you
anything
very
else?
much. No, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So at this time, before any further council discussion, I'd like to invite some the people who filled out a comment form, who would like to make comment. Kim, are there any others?
No.
Okay. Just so everyone's aware, you have 3 minutes to comment. I'll ask you to come up to the podium. We're trying a new digital timer, so I won't be using my computer. So it seems to be a little bit noisy. So forgive me, but you'll at least hear when the alarm dings. Oh, okay, one more. All right, so I'm going to start right from the top. Brett Hopkins. Forgive me, this is going to be the first time I've used this.
Brett Hopkins, I'm an owner-operator, Fairfax Station Enterprises, and the president of SOPOA. This is the second time I've spoken here. The other time was on a 4-2 initiative by the mayor back in May. When he talks about utopia, there is no such thing as utopia, okay? Unfortunately, we had to pay for 9 months of a study that if you just did a market survey, called any of our leasing offices, we could have given you rent availability, pricing, all that for high, medium, and low housing, apartments, duplexes, triplexes, etc. I don't think there's a problem and letting people make up their own minds. So what if we have 65%, 67% renters out here? That provides maximum mobility. People can change jobs, they can change location, they can find out what it's like to be on the Eastern Shore and move if they want to. You get locked into a house, you catch the tide wrong, you're going to be ending up in a short sale or defaulting on a loan, and that's going to stay with you forever. You can come talk to a landlord, and we can work something out and get you out of that. That maxes mobility in America, and that's what we want. Utopia and rent control does nothing but hurt those that are less informed, elderly, and disenfranchised for one reason or another. I mean, if I went to the store and I said, I feel disenfranchised because I have to buy bread from you. I shouldn't have to buy, I'm a 100% rent buyer. I'm a bread buyer, okay? I go there, I have to pay $3 for a loaf of bread. And now that's a problem I have because I'm a 100% bread buyer. If I said, no, it's only worth 50 cents, I come to the mayor, he says, yeah, let's do a utopian experiment, just like he came up with the 42 argument in May. We'll make giant foods sell bread for 50 cents. Well, I'm going to buy all I can today. We're going to have a bread party, and then I'm going to go back tomorrow and say, give me another basket full of bread. And what are they going to say? We don't make bread anymore. Okay? That's what happens when you do price controls, rent controls. You can call it whatever you want, but it's a utopian dream. And when you try and inject government into an economic free market capitalist model, it is no longer free market. Okay? That's socialism. And in America, we know it when we see it. And it needs to stop. We're bouncing off the bottom now. We're on the upslope. We got a positive indicator in our economy. Jobs are starting to flow back. And as far as I know, when incomes collapsed around here, I think it was during Mayor Ireton's watch.
I gotta stop you.
So I want everyone just to remember that. There is no such thing as utopia. Thank
sir.
you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, next is Philip LaBelle.
Thank you. I have not read the report. I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to see it. I want to thank Matt for the efforts that were made to prepare that report. Who am I? I am a native of Salisbury. I don't live in Salisbury. I live in Delmar. I'm an academic economist. I've spent 31 years in teaching. I'm not an urban affairs specialist. I appreciate the numbers that went into this study. I'm here to say that when you impose rent controls, they are going to reduce the supply of housing over the long run. In the short run, they will not. Having said that, I am sensitive to the poverty rate in this area. I think we should all be sensitive to that, and we need to think about ways in which we could help those, in effect, whose incomes are lower than average. Why is some of that occurring? We could have a long discussion about schooling and outcomes. We should also take into consideration what's happened to jobs over the years. Where have businesses in the city of Salisbury been going? Why was the center at Salisbury created? Because they wanted to be outside the city limits. Nowhere in these numbers have I seen anything about property taxes and the incentives that affect these homeowners. When we talk about things like a fair rate of return or looking at price gouging, those are highly emotive terms. And what I'm looking at is if you have a board that's going to stabilize it, there will be delays. It will provide employment for some members of the city because you'll have to have a larger commission than those that were being proposed in this document. And it's going to take a longer time, and I predict the long-term effect will be an acute supply of housing shortages taking place. I did prepare some materials for here, but because I didn't have authority to, or knowledge of, I should say, of how this might come together, I'm going to distribute these at the end of my remarks, and you can look at them as you see fit. It's got my email and who I am and that sort of thing right on, and I'd be happy to share that with you. But in any case, I'm an economist, and I guess I like the idea that I'm being thrown into the category of a normal economist and traditional theory and so forth. My politics are left of center, if I have to say anything. For me to be a quote, liberal in my politics, I find at odds with what I'm saying to you here, but I have no trouble saying it. Yeah, I think that rent control is a bad idea. You can call it stabilization. I have lived in Montclair, New Jersey for a good part of my working life. I have people who pay $30,000 a year in property taxes. So the tax burden is excessive, and what it does is it subsidizes the exodus of jobs and people out of the region. And what that does is leaves the residual number of property owners where they are carrying the burden of taxation. Until this study or this body looks at the effects of fiscal policy on the city's finances and how you're going to finance job attraction in the city, I don't see the argument going very far forward in terms of rent control. So I would stand very strongly against it. I'm done.
And with 6 seconds to spare. I think it is important to note, however, that the center at Salisbury was, is, and will always be inside the city limits.
I tell you, annexed it. That's true.
We don't get to annex.
Next item is Kevin Adams. Next person.
Socialists and liars.
Hi, my name's Kevin Adams. I'm a local landlord. And I hate reading the paper and about this subject and categorizing us as all being greedy. And I think that kind of mindset, that kind of thinking, doesn't have a place in office at all. I don't think that should be the motivator for trying to help people, criticizing other people and categorizing them all as being greedy, a whole group of people. I don't know what you do for helping people, but I do a whole lot to help people. So I don't want to say where I think that kind of thinking comes from, but I don't think it's good for business. I don't think it's good for our city. I don't think it's good for anybody's pocket, wherever they come from. How many minutes do I have left?
I started a little bit late, but you have 2 minutes and 44 seconds. Okay. All right, next is Mike Wisner.
Good evening. My name is Mike Wisner, and I don't know if I'm smarter than Kevin Adams, but I've got a few thoughts I'd like to present to you this evening. I've been a property owner in real estate management for 40 years now in Salisbury. And I can say without a doubt that the proposal before the City Council today will utterly destroy the rental housing industry in Salisbury. While on the surface these proposals seem attractive to the renter and to low-income individuals, the economics simply don't work. First, we need to realize that what this actually tries to accomplish. This initiative is rent reduction, not stabilization. It's reducing the rents that are currently charged, not just stabilizing them. It has no basis in the economics of the rental industry and is based solely on assessed values which do not reflect the cost of home ownership. You've just heard a convoluted and complicated history of rent control. To see how the proposal would work in the real world, I've done a couple of calculations based on what the mayor's proposal would do in the real world with my properties, two of which were on the same street and adjacent to properties that are listed on the board earlier this evening. The results aren't pretty. I own 114 Van Buren Street, have for 30 years, 2-bedroom, single-family home, assessed value $40,000. 0.6% rent ratio is $240 per month. My annual income on that, based on this proposal, is $2,880 a year. My expenses in 2013 for operating expenses were $3,534, and my mortgage payment, which is only $439 a month, is $5,268. $8,802 is out of pocket. Income, $2,880. Net loss, $5,922, year 2013. The following year, I did better. I had no turnover. Operation cost went down $700. My mortgage payment made the same. I only will lose $4,271. In addition to that, the roof went up this year. So in 2015, I just paid a couple months ago $4,150. So with this proposal, I lose $10,000 in 2 years, and plus I have to pay $4,000 for a roof. You can see where that's going. I did another one on Priscilla Street Townhouse, exact same results, slightly less loss, but when the heat pump goes up and I'm losing $3,000 a year, a cash flow out of pocket, and I have to replace a heat pump for $5,000. Well, that ain't going to happen. It can't happen. From a market capitalization and income approach, these properties are now worth zero. there is not only no income, there's negative income, and there's no way to get out of negative income. There's no value. There's no reason for me to hold it, no reason to put money into it. Walk away. There's no other option. Walk. These are figures and calculations, the executive summary that there are a lot of figures and calculations in the executive summary that were distributed by the mayor's office. I'm not an accountant. I don't have the time to go through all through those numbers, but HUD does, and maybe I can use some of Kevin's time, if you permit.
I've got to stop you.
Okay. HUD does a rent calculation, which is triple most of the values you see before us, and HUD determines this to be fair market rent. What he's coming up with now is unfair market rent, arbitrarily defined. Thank you.
Mr. Bill Martin.
Bill Martin with ERA Martin Associates. The rent control will equal falling prices, a phenomenon that we experienced in the 2008-2010 time period. In my belief that this rent control will cause the lowest end properties to drop because they're calculated their value based on the income that they generate. So their prices are going to go down, move-up property values will go down, and just like the 2008 period, we'll end up with a lot of vacant properties in neighborhoods, tall grass, properties that'll have letters on the front door for a year or two before they finally get foreclosed, and will drive property values down across the board, not just rental properties, but other properties in the county. Some of the numbers we looked at earlier indicated that the Salisbury City has an exorbitant amount of rentals. And I'd like to point out that the county has the reverse effect. And I think in Wycomico County, there are very few rentals in comparison to the city. And that kind of balances things out. When you look at just the city, I think you're getting a false view of what the total picture is. And that's because the city is where the sewer and water is available, and you can't have higher density properties in the county because they don't have sewer and water available. Like Mike, I took a look at some of my income and expenses, and my numbers were amazingly similar, Mike. I think you had $3,500 in cost. Mine came to $3,651 for the average unit in the last 12 months. And that money would not be recoverable. So guess what? I'm not going to spend that money if we can't get it back. That means the properties are going to be in poor condition, and we'll just have to let them get poorer and poorer. Then we'll get fines from the city for that. And I'd just like to point out, we don't have rent control on gasoline prices. We don't have rent control on bread. Why are we suddenly thinking that we have to have rent control on houses? I don't think there's any difference. It's a free market value. There are literally hundreds of places that people can go to rent property. We have vacancies in some of our properties right now. People can go in there, shop the price. They can go see Stu Lear or Richard Inslee or somebody else and compare the price and get the best price that's available. That's what the free market is about. And if there was one landlord in town and they owned all the properties, then that would be a real problem because we'd have a monopoly. We don't have a monopoly. There's a lot of different landlords charging different rates for different types of properties. Some of them are older properties, some of them are newer properties, some of them are bigger properties. We have all varieties, and people have the right to make their own selection from that variety. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Next is Nestor Bleach.
My name's Nestor Bleach, and I'm a homeowner at 615 Camden Avenue for 19 years. While it may be well-intentioned, I'm against the rent control initiative under consideration. Depending upon which statistic you use, Salisbury's residential housing stock is comprised of between 62 and 70% rental properties, with the remainder being owner-occupied. This means that in most cases, city homeowners own houses in neighborhoods that include at least some percentage of rental properties, some more than others. So legislation governing rental properties does have a material impact on city homeowners. My property on Camden Avenue is surrounded by rentals, not unlike other homeowners throughout the city. As individual enterprises, these rental properties range from being well-maintained to very poorly managed by their respective landowners. If the real intention of this legislation is to take the profit out of rental properties under the auspices of capping rents and hoping for a renaissance, then the experiment will fail. And it will be the tax-paying homeowners and the rent-paying tenants who ultimately pay the price. Capped rents will not precipitate better maintenance of rentals. Our neighborhoods already have too many rundown rental properties. Capped rents may precipitate more foreclosures, and capped rents will not precipitate capital improvements or reinvestment. Less rent equals less cash flow and less maintenance. What implementation of the proposed legislation would do is torpedo any remaining property value a city homeowner has left in the proximity of numerous rental properties. This is highly unfair to homeowners. And this at a time when we need more and not fewer homeowners in Salisbury. To the landlords in the room, do not interpret this opposition as an endorsement of the status quo. There is a subset of Salisbury landlords who maximize profits while ignoring or minimizing property maintenance and management. And it is precisely that sort of an approach that creates an environment where legislation like this will continue to be proposed again and again. A renewed commitment to stewardship and good faith on your part has never been a more necessary part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Wesley Cox. Gotta do it.
I know, I'm just kidding. Council President, Mayor, thanks for having us and allowing us to speak tonight. First, Theo, right? Great presentation. It sounds like you took Dr. Manakian's class at Salisbury University, because that's exactly what it was. It was an educational classroom exercise. That's not the real world. I don't know what you do for a living. You're obviously a very bright young man. But after taking my economics classes in college, I thought the rental business was a phenomenal business to be in. Mr. Weisner's comments was more real. I brought an actual financial statement of a property that I'd love to share with you guys. Using your program, every number in here is verified and real. I would lose on one property, and I'm not a big landlord, as full disclosure. I own less than a handful. I'm here representing the real estate industry. I'm the secretary of the Coastal Association of Realtors. Using this program, I would lose $5,284. That's negative $5,284. Obviously, that's unsustainable. My properties would then be given back to the bank, unfortunately. Nobody wants that. You don't want that. The bank doesn't want that. The economy doesn't want that. The renter doesn't want that. That's exactly what I'd be forced to do, because no one's going to come out of pocket $5,284. Theo, that's real life. Economics, of course, I agree with it. I know the theories behind it, but it's not real. This is real life. I know those theories make sense. We had a professor come up, everything he said, but I mean, sounded great. But this is real life. Mr. Weiser showed real life examples. I'm glad Mr. Adams brought up the comment about greedy landlords. My only advice to the mayor is, I certainly don't classify myself as a greedy landlord. My record speaks for myself as the 2014 National Sperry Van Ness Humanitarian of the Year. I am not a greedy person. Most landlords in here aren't greedy people. So I personally took offense to that comment. I know you didn't direct it toward me, obviously, but my suggestion would be to know the audience before you just throw out comments like that. Couple just quick comments. False assumptions. 30-year mortgages? Who here has a 30-year mortgage on an investment property? It's non-existent. I meet with bankers on a regular basis. You cannot get a 30-year mortgage on an investment property. So where are these assumptions coming from? Where are these economic models coming from? This is a real-life example that, again, I'll share with you with an actual mortgage, not just textbook economics. This is what happens in real life. So what calculations were used saying that the homeowner can, or the investor can pay off their mortgage over this example? It's just not true. It's not reality. 4 seconds left, I'll stop. Thanks, Jake.
Next is Richard Inslee Jr.
My name is Richard Inslee. I've been in this business for 47 years this year, and I've had a lot of experience, and I'm still trying to reconcile in my mind the things that I heard in the presentation with my years of real-life experience, and I can tell you I haven't reconciled much. I'm also trying to figure out how I can rebut a 45-minute presentation in 3 minutes. And wondering whether I might be able to borrow a couple of Kevin Adams minutes. I don't know of a faster way to destroy a neighborhood than a proposal such as this. Why? You say, well, we've all seen the effects of the foreclosure crisis had on neighborhoods, vacant, boarded up houses, no maintenance done, tall grass. It has gotten to a point where even the mayor has proposed the city budget money to buy some of them, fix them up, or demolish them. How did this happen? Well, simply stated, because the owners didn't have enough money to pay the mortgage and the expenses. But before they stopped paying the mortgage, they stopped spending money on other things, including upkeep, taxes, and so forth. It's a fact that when the owners can't pay the costs and expenses, they walk away, but not before they have bled the property as far as it can be bled. Rental property is no different. One of the examples cited up here was a property that I own, my son and I own, Alabama Avenue. It takes the purchase price, which in that example was $84,000. It ignores any money that was spent when you bought the property because this property was not ready for rent. It took another $10,000 to get it up to snuff, carpet, appliances, HVAC, you name it. So to fast forward, and I'd like to give you the details, but with $10,000 down and a 15-year payment schedule, the monthly mortgage payment is $708.84. Now, I could go through a whole litany of expenses, starting with city taxes, insurance, and so on and so forth, that will bring the cost pretty close to, if not more than, the $1,000 a month that this property is renting for. And all of those things are fixed expenses. They don't take any holiday. They have to be met. And that's assuming that you have the property rented 12 months out of the year with no vacancy. And what's the one important expense that I haven't mentioned, and that is, you guessed it, repairs and maintenance. No money for repairs and maintenance.
I've got to stop you. Thank you, Mr. Inslee. Greg Johnson.
Thank you, Jake. My name is Greg Johnson. I'm President and CEO of Providence State Bank. We are getting ready to start a loan production office in Salisbury, so I'm looking forward to being in Salisbury. A couple things that struck me. One of the slides said that Salisbury was the second lowest in home ownership. If you cap somebody's rent to $250, why would they want to become a homeowner? So that would pretty much disincent that. So, Mr. Mayor, you said that you made a comment that the foreclosure market is getting better, and in fact, I think it is, but it's been a long 6 years. But please know that this proposal will only increase the foreclosures. It's real simple math, as you have heard. Frankly, on a 20-year, and that typically is the maximum amortization on a rental, will be written on a 5-year call. Let's say a rate today is 5%. And a 5-year call means that mortgage will reprice in 5 years. And we are at the low end of the interest rate environment. We are only going to face higher rates. That's going to put even more pressure on this rate reduction plan, not stabilization plan. Frankly, some of these rents that you have up here, they won't even pay for taxes and insurance, as you've heard. So what's going to happen? Well, banks are going to start foreclosing again. And we're going to kick the tenants out. Why? Because we have a legal liability problem. I can't have a tenant on a property owned by a bank because something's going to go wrong and I'm probably going to get sued. We have what is perceived to be deep pockets. Therefore, we kick them out. So where are these people going to go? Well, they're only going to go to, let's say, the county because the city is now dead. So we've got limited supply in the county, which has been pointed out. We're now going to have a higher demand. What do you think that's going to do to rents in the county? It is simple supply and demand sometimes. You mentioned that the median income for Salisbury is only $37,000. I don't know why you were blaming landlords for that. Maybe the focus should be on your administration to go out there and find better jobs and increase the educational programs here. And Mr. Mayor, you compared, Mr. Theo, you also compared Salisbury to a city in Georgia. And you pointed out that utility costs were $50 higher. So I'm assuming along with this legislation, you're planning on going, Mr. Mayor, to Delmarva Power and asking them to cap or reduce their energy costs in addition to this. I don't think that's probably going to happen. I also just pointed out that college rentals, I think you said when you take college rentals out of the market, it's only $20 higher than the national average. Not bad in my book.
Pete Richardson. Okay. Chris Eccleston.
I sent you all a letter earlier today. I brought actual copies. I'm just going to read it. I'm speaking on behalf of the almost 900 members of the Salisbury Area Chamber of Commerce. I'm just going to read through this real quick. On behalf of the Salisbury Area Chamber of Commerce, thank you for the opportunity to share our membership's concern with the administration's proposed rent stabilization initiative. Our chamber is committed to the success, economic viability, health, and overall well-being of our community and its citizens, and appreciates active partnership with the city to ensure these ideals are realized. While we understand and appreciate the administration's desire to ensure affordable housing for all within the city corporate limits, we cannot help but voice our significant concerns with this measure. Has been pointed out with this proposal, is identical to legislation that was passed in College Park 2005, which was overturned in 2014 at the request of the surrounding community because of the problems that it created. College Park Homeowners Associated noted that the law caused more conflict and frictions among various stakeholders than building a healthy relationship and addressing affordable housing issues. I'm going to skip down because I probably don't have time. So these are the key points. This legislation will put the burden of adjusting and accommodating income-based rental rates on the landlords versus a subsidy model to support the tenants. Landlords should not be penalized because of the economic forces that have set current rental rates throughout the area. This unfairly and unrealistically cuts rental revenue, which many people have talked about, which will actually decrease the size of the rental market, creates a barrier to improvement and beautification to the properties and property owners by cutting revenue, which many of them have spoken. Contributes to increased crime rate. Nobody's talked about tonight. Squatting, blight. A lot of people have talked about that. And is going to generate a downward spiral for those affected neighborhoods that we are trying to actually help as a community, or I believe this legislation wants to help. In no way contributes or adds to the community's long-term vision for Salisbury development, beautification, improvement, or growth. Reduces the overall real estate market value within the city limits. This initiative was built around the concept of addressing low home ownership rates, yet effectively encourages a pattern of renting and avoiding ownership. Incentives matter. I think that's economics too. Let us be clear. We do agree with the mayor and would support his desire to afford affordable housing for low-income families. However, we believe that constructing residences like River's Edge, subsidized housing apartment complex is preferable alternative to what the administration is proposing this evening. Thank you.
April Walther.
and thank you. My husband and I bought our first house about 25 years ago here in the city of Salisbury. We did it to help provide some retirement income because at that time our 401k in the stock market was tanking. Since then, we've only bought 3 more. We're a small landlord. Those 3 we bought in the county instead of the city. We did that because we found that it was a lower tax burden. It was also less intrusive because of the number of times that the city wants to come in and go through the home to make sure that everything is good. We do provide a house that we feel is one that we would live in ourselves. We believe in the golden rule. It is a home that when we buy it, the price that we pay for it is not the final price that we have to pay. There are appliances that need to be put in, heating system. One of the houses that you had in the report was on the house, on the street where we have our home. The amount that the home, our neighbor's home would be valued at for rental was about $450 a month. If this amount is comparable to what our home within the city limits could be rented for, we would have to rent it for over 3 months just to pay for the property taxes. Another 2 months worth of rent would go for the insurance. And then of course there is the upkeep. It is just something that will not work. For us, it would mean the sale of the house. We would no longer want to be landlords within the city limits. Thank you.
And Blair Rainier.
Good evening. I agree with much of what's been said tonight, but one thing that's very important to me and for us to consider is how are we in Salisbury going to be able to determine what fair rent is, or what's a fair return on investment? When I think about what fair rent is, or a fair return on investment, it fluctuates all the time. It goes back to a supply and demand principle. If I was to rent a property for too high of a rental rate, nobody rents it. However, if I lower my rental rate to a certain point, people will rent it. And that fair determination is based on where you find a tenant and a landlord who both agree on the number being fair. It's fluid. It changes from day to day. It changes from minute to minute in our markets. And it happens across the country. That's what our free market does every day. How can we expect 7 people to be appointed to determine what fair is on such a fluid principle? Appreciate your consideration.
Okay. I'd like to open up for council discussion at this point. Anyone have particular questions for the administration, comments, thoughts?
Let me be the first.
Mr. Spees?
Okay. Theo, I have issues with, there are 8,600 students at SU. About 2,200 live on campus. That leaves 6,400 living someplace. Where are they living? Not that this is a student issue, but I have issue with the numbers. I wanted to know where you got those.
Is this on? Yeah. Hello? Yeah. It's I think it's closer to 3,600 because University Park is actually considered on-campus housing, or 2,600, whatever it is. You got to include University Park in the on-campus numbers. Secondly, 950 units. That's having about a 3-person per unit, which puts you at approximately around 3,000 units. The off-campus number includes the university at Shady Groves. It includes people who commute, so those who live at home. It includes people that are within the county, which of course we know is substantial. And if you look at a lot of the donuts in the area, like what we consider the donuts, a lot of those are actually filled with rental units. So when you actually bring the number of people back to the students, it's fairly equitable. And even if it is, let's say, substantially undervalued, and it is an additional 500 units, which I don't believe, but let's say for the sake of argument it is, that still would only reduce rents about another 2.3%. So you would see rents reduced by about 6%. So.
Very good. Stay here for a moment, please. I'm sorry, but I get all the time.
Mr. Spies, you're done? You're done? Next? Go ahead.
Put your kitchen timer away and let's move on. I want to thank you for all the work you've done on this. Can you tell me what your job title is?
Grant specialist.
And how many hours did you spend on this project?
A lot of this I did in my free time, not as grant specialist before. I was an AmeriCorps service member, and I spent part of my time running the Salisbury-Wycomico Youth Civics Council, and spent a lot of other time doing this on my own. Many late nights, to say the least.
I want to say that you're an exceptionally bright individual, and I hope we can see you in city government, for quite some time, unless you find a better job somewhere else, which I'm sure you will, actually.
Thank you.
I have concerns about, we're coming up on an election in 4 weeks' time. Why did this pop up 4 weeks before the election?
That is a political question, which I must refer to Mayor Ireton.
Mr. Ireton, why did this pop up 4 weeks before the election?
Because actually,
when you've been here for 4 years.
Mr.
And a half, yeah, right.
Do I have a question yet?
Yes, you do.
Thank you.
Go for it.
Mr. Williams actually did most of this during the summer before he was hired as a grant specialist. We wanted to make sure that, in fact, what we did is go through and we tried to pull up a thing, as I think it's in your packet, frequently asked questions, because they didn't want to come and end up with 700 questions, which I already was going to have questions about. So what we tried to do is try and determine what questions we might get from the council and from the public. So that took probably another 2 or 3 months to get that information. Then I went back probably sometime in the middle of the summer and said, this doesn't make any sense if we're going to compare it to places that have 500,000 people and median incomes that are $350,000 and house income, housing assessments that are at 200. So I made Theo go back for another couple of months and try and put us into a group of cities that had like characteristics that we have. That's why when you hear Theo kept saying of the 260, what he was saying was of the 260 places that we found that were most like us across the city, because I didn't want to bring you an apples to oranges or an oranges to apples comparison. The fact that it slides in right now in this election cycle is just, we decided to start looking at this in January of last year, and this is the timetable it came up in.
I feel like we're all fish here rising to the bait. Do you know what I mean, folks? This is an issue that should be talked about for years,
Yes.
not a month, okay? Each of us has interests. Each of us has a hope that we can find affordable housing for everyone, but I have serious doubts about this program as it's presented. I've done my homework too, and everywhere I look, this is not a long-term solution to anything. It takes a bite out of everywhere that it goes. No matter what rent controls that you propose, even those that that are attached to the CPI, that are managed and stated at a level of the increase in people's incomes, they aren't even successful. So I think that we really need to have a dialogue here, and I'm glad all these folks here, and I'm happy that I heard what the folks that spoke at the lectern had to say. But there's a huge dialogue here that there's just, for this period of time, with a month until elections, and that this board is going to be changed, we're going to have a new mayor. This is a real fluff issue, to tell the truth, and that's what I feel about it at this point. I think that we've had a lot of much ado about nothing at this point, because at this point we can do nothing. So I encourage you all to continue this dialogue. Whether I'm here or not in another 5 weeks is, not a thing. But let's look at what our housing issues are. We have housing issues, certainly. We have some landlords who are greedy. There are a few of you out there that are greedy, not specifically in this room, but that are seriously gouging some of the people I have. I have a house near me that 4-bedroom house, $675 per bedroom per month. This is $23,000 a year. That's a lot of money, okay? And it's a lot of money for an individual to pay for a bedroom. But again, it seems to be the market rate, and I think that market rate is dependent upon what people will pay across the bridge. They're expecting to come here to pay something like they would pay there, and lo and behold, here it is. So maybe we need some adjustments in that regard. But this, again, is a dialogue that should be going on for years as opposed to 30 days. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Mr. Heath?
Yeah, I have to tell you I have a frustration. Theo, let me ask you a question. How many of the landlords did you speak with in developing this thing?
I will admit I did not speak to any landlords. I purely used research.
You know, let me tell you my frustration. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you put reasonable people together in a room and sit down and talk about what your goal is, you can probably come up with a solution. Lobbing hand grenades is not the way to solve a problem. And I think this is a lob of a hand grenade. And personally, I think we would be better off if we chose a strategy that would involve the people who are involved in the process and give them a task and then come up with a reasonable solution. Because some of the things that we heard, and I did the calculations, and I know for a fact that there are a couple of young millenniums who have invested before they have children, as an example, to rent properties to put their kids through school eventually. And those figures are real. Those figures are real, because I know what the figures are for the two that I'm talking about. And it would devastate them. And I think that we have to consider those examples in with all the rest of the other, and we have to come up with solutions. I think if you ask them for some solutions, they'll probably come up with them. So I'm a little disappointed, and I think that the timing is just not good. Let's talk to the stakeholders. Before I make a decision, I want to talk to the stakeholders, and I want to hear from all the stakeholders. I'm not about to make any decisions on anything like this without input from everyone.
And I just want to follow up. This is a very serious issue. Very, very serious. And I've always said, as my election motto has always been, building partnerships for positive change. And right now, as it's been presented, I don't think anything positive is going to come out of this. I agree with Councilman Heath that we need to sit down and talk to the people who are in the business. You're not in the business, and neither am I. They're more experienced in rentals than you or I. Did this research, and as I've always said, and when, not knocking the mayor, but when we did away with goal setting sessions, and if this was an interest of the mayor or any council person of rent stabilization, if we had the goal setting sessions, that could have been one of the issues that came out and been discussed prior to going to the media, prior to going to the NAACP, prior to just bringing it to the public's eye, not sitting down and, as Mr. Heath said, hashing it out. Because this is a serious, serious endeavor that it'll affect everyone in the community. And I agree with Chris, when we talked about River's Edge, we have River's Edge Apartments, we own the property. And our rent, I just found it, Mitchell Landing is $600 and some a month. So we're losing on that property. We're not making money on that property. That's part of our financial status when it comes out. Are we at a loss? Refresh my memory, because we have to keep it affordable. So what they think is affordable is $600 some a month. So we're asking people to charge $250 and $250, $122, whatever. So are we going to do ourselves that way? So I think we need to treat people with respect, whether we agree with them. We need to sit down and talk to them one-on-one, whether you agree with them or not. And I think we have a problem of doing that. And I think a lot of things could be solved if we talked and hash it over and look at the pros and cons and look at what other cities do. Now, there was a reason College Park no longer uses that. I wouldn't even use that in the study because College Park doesn't have that anymore. So we need to find another city that maybe does, and maybe it does work. I don't know. So that's why, personally, I don't want to say it's political, that this came up this time, but I'm not going to make a decision if I'm asked what I think about rent control. My comment is going to be no comment until we actually sit down and talk it over with everyone concerned.
Okay. Well, just some closing thoughts. First of all, we're planning a goal-setting session.
I know we are.
You just wanted to poke me.
Yeah.
You did.
I know we are. I'm excited about it.
Second of all, when this is over, I've got to ask Mr. Heath the difference between a young millennial and whatever the alternative is. Am I an old millennial? I realize that I'm on the high end.
I'm actually an old
Okay. I don't know if that was a barb thrown my way or what.
Just a little shot.
Something. Second, I want to thank the public for coming and commenting. I want to thank Mayor Ireton for bringing up what is no doubt an important issue. And for me, the issues of, and bigger than just rent, but the issue of chronic and debilitating poverty is one that we've got to address in our community, and of course nationwide it's got to be discussed and addressed. The issue of home ownership as well has to be discussed and addressed in this community. I don't think that it's a matter of what happens inside the city versus outside. It's as a community. Wycomico County has too high a proportion of rentals. To just one thing I'll disagree with is that I think it does matter that proportion is as high as it is. I want to thank the staff and Theo in particular for putting a lot of effort into this. And I think we certainly want to talk about the issues. The proposal itself is a solution. And I think if we only discuss a problem through the lens of a solution, we don't consider alternatives. I'll admit right here, I don't know what all the solutions are, and I don't know what all the alternatives are. But if we only talk about one proposed solution, we miss an opportunity. And I think Mr. Heath is right in that we probably need to bring stakeholders in. We probably need to talk to a lot of people, and maybe we've got time over the coming years to do that. So I've got a lot of questions based on what I've read and what I've heard today. And the logical thought process for me goes something like, what happens? I had to write it down. What happens when a property owner can't pay their mortgage? What happens to lending in general in a city when a policy creates an environment where loan recipients are being foreclosed on or walk away from their properties? What happens to the renters? And we've heard some answers to these, I know, but I still have a lot of questions. Why doesn't this affect renters in multifamily housing? Because that's a majority of the renters in the city. Why not those units as well if we're concerned about rent affordability? Given that supply and demand is a market force, what happens to all those people? Do they go line up at University Orchard or other multifamily places and knocking on the door and say, okay, now we need somewhere to live, and the managers of those properties say, okay, well, again, supply and demand, rent's just going up. And then what happens, as we have newly vacant properties, what happens to blight, what happens to the neighborhoods, and what happens, to how do you fill those again? Is there a line of people waiting with the credit and the cash to purchase a home, just waiting, and there aren't any homes available to purchase? I would guess not, but I don't know the answer. I think again, there are a lot of questions that have come up today, and we can get some answers to those and in future discussions. But ultimately, this is what it comes down to for me. If there are disadvantages, how thoroughly have we analyzed them yet? And if we haven't, let's go through that process, and we can do it at this table, and we can do it publicly. And then, the big question for me is, if only 4 states have currently, if only 4 states have rent control laws, and if 36 states have outlawed them, and there's 10 states that allow it where it doesn't exist, and Maryland's one of the 4 where it is allowed and exists. I don't know if that's just based on College Park, but if the states that allow it and the municipalities, the few municipalities where it's allowed, have the highest rents in the country, which they do, it's the New Yorks and the LAs and the San Franciscos, and Salisbury is kind of close to that.
Yep.
Is rent control going to be the solution? Will rent control reduce it? I don't know, but it makes me think that, again, if the club of really high rents is where rent control exists, and we don't want to be in that club anymore, maybe that's not the policy solution. I don't know the answer to that, but that's where I would think. And then just to the point of timing, I think we've got to look beyond the 35 or 40 days of an election cycle, and say, okay, how do we resolve this over the long term? How do we address poverty and home ownership? Huge things over the long trajectory, and I don't think we can solve that in 35 or 40 days. So
Neither do I.
I think what I would ask for here at this table now would just be, one, to Mayor Ireton, to the administration, I think answering questions that have been asked today is going to be critical. Question 2 would be to council. The question is, do you want to move this to legislative session? I think I know the answer to that question.
No.
And if not, then and we put this on a pending items list for future discussion. I think I hesitate to do anything more than that, because again, we are going to have a new mayor and new council in the future, and they're going to have to make decisions about what they want to do with this conversation. So I would ask really for council consensus to move this not to a future work session for continued discussion, not to legislative session, but just to pending items on the mayor's pending items list.
Yes, fine with me.
Okay. Mayor Ireton?
No, I
closing
appreciate
thoughts?
the incredible way that you are able to take what it is that we're all discussing about and put it in the context upon which you did. No one is here this evening from the rental community or from single-family homes, and there's a reason for that. And it's not the reason that you think. So I will, if I am the only one in the room, to say on behalf of single-family neighborhoods, we may not have to do this, but we have to do something. So I'm hoping that something comes out of the conversations that we're going to have in the future. I'm not going to take exception with anything that any of the council members said, or anything except really one person who made it incredibly personal. But over the last 40 years, we have put everything in place we possibly could to make sure that everybody's interests were looked out for. Quasi-judicial boards to go over properties and code violations, town gown committees to try and make sure everybody's working together. So the idea that the people are not in the room, don't think matches up to the actual situation. My apologies to you for dropping this right now with an election, because I've never heard Mr. Heath speak like that before, and I hope in anything that I've ever do again, Mr. Heath never has to speak like that again. But I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that we have to talk about this, and if it just so happens that it falls right now, I will take Mr. Heath's the tone of his voice as a let's try not to do this again, and we won't, but I will not stop talking about it ever as long as I'm still here. But I appreciate this conversation. The people that are here are the people that I expected to be here, so some of them friends, some of them not, but all of them familiar, and this is a good conversation for our city, and I'm glad we started it tonight. So your leadership and how you articulated what we need to do at the end is an exceptional display of your leadership, Mr. Council President, so thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Anything else from council?
I just want to tell the mayor, I'm a renter. I've rented in a single family neighborhood, older neighborhood. the rents there are not exorbitant. I've talked to some people, and we do have a vacant house next door to me. But I just want to let you know, I ain't gonna run it. I can understand how some, but I do have a good landlord. He cuts my grass, shovels my snow. He does all the things that you all put the signs on the door to do. He is very considerate. We put a new heating system in, $7,000. So my rent did not increase when he did that. So I just want to say I'm blessed to have a good landlord.
I know you are with us for the next item as well, so stick around.
Something a bit better.
But I don't know about everyone else. I need to take 2 minutes. So we're going to recess for 2 minutes.